All right, folks, welcome back to another edition of the Summer Series. We have got an exciting investor to showcase today, and we are talking to someone who was worried about their fear of having nothing and turning that into a flourishing portfolio, Ben. But what else?
Well, Bryce, we talk about personal loss. We talk about a pivot in life, and there's also a health issue, yet this absolute positive mindset just trumps everything.
It's a cracking show, folks. It's a cracking chat. Let's rip into the show now.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance, and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to another edition of the Summer Series. And Ben, welcome back to you in the shadows of Christmas, mate. Have you made a list and have you checked it twice?
Another Christmas just on the horizon, Bryce. Kicking the toes, tapping the feet. A little bit light on the feet this time of the year. A few more smiles around the place. It's good to be alive. Good to be alive.
Time. So if you're celebrating Christmas, it's in a wonderful time. If you're not, enjoy the holiday season that is upon us. But Ben, we have got an incredible story today of a property investor who has just adversity in the background with family, but also adversity in their own circumstances, which you're going to hear about when we chat to our guest today about a health story that needed to be overcome. So there's a lot to talk about today.
Yeah, this is an inspiring story about an aspiring person who has an abundance mindset. So I think from that point of view, this is a good story all around.
It is a good story. Well, let's cut to the conversation, Ben, that you and I had recently with Jack Burns. All right, Ben, we've got a very special guest today. We are, of course, in our summer series. We're chatting with a podcast listener. His name is Jack Burns. Welcome to the Property Couch, Jack.
Thanks for having me, guys. Looking forward to it.
We are looking forward to it too. These stories are transformational for so many people, so we're looking forward to getting into the detail for you. But let's start at the top, Jack. As you know, as a podcast listener, we love to know as far back as we can where we learnt stories and money beliefs from our parents growing up. So what were the conversations like for you about money growing up over the dinner table?
Yeah, so I suppose for me, I didn't really realize or understand what was going on around the dinner table until I hit a certain age. Not too sure when that was, but I suppose watching my dad, who was a really savvy business owner himself, took part in a lot of different businesses over his life, or when I look back now, was very good at how he did it all. Very smart man, very business savvy man. So I suppose the first sort of inkling of money and things like that came from like a business perspective. And I mean, again, as I look back now, he sort of taught me a lot just from as a young age, just by like witnessing what he would do, which was pretty cool now I look back at it. And the older I get, the more I sort of understand how good those lessons were from him and how important, I guess, they are for me now in terms of my life and what I do.
What were you witnessing? What were you seeing?
I just suppose like the biggest one I remember was him always on the phone, talking to prospective clients, talking to his business partners, and just the ability he had to sort of talk to people, which is, again, as I get older and older and understand more, is the biggest part of doing anything successfully is to be able to talk to people on a sort of human level, which I try and take into my life sort of every day. In terms of money, like specifically, I think we never went without, that's for sure. We always had a really good, fun sort of life. We would go away a lot. We'd always enjoy going out for dinners and things like that. And we grew up on the northern beaches of Sydney. So we had a pretty cruisy sort of lifestyle, go to the beach, go surfing, that type of stuff. And mum looked after us at home. And again, from her, we had a lot of really fun times and they sort of shared the load, and dad would work and mum would look after us, and she'd teach us all sorts of things and dad would teach us all sorts of things. And I suppose the main sort of things that I learned from my parents was that you work hard for money, but you also need to enjoy it, because a lot of things will pass you by if you don't. So I guess the biggest thing is that money's never really fleeting. It always makes its way to you eventually, as long as you work for it. As long as you're willing to sort of dig in and have a go, it'll always come to you. But it shouldn't ever be squandered, and it should never just be squirreled away for a rainy day. You got to always use it at some point.
Jack, that's a really nice overview. Now, if we can just obviously let our community know you're 29 years of age, you've given us an idea of where you grew up. That's amazing. And it sounds like from your dad, who was very much an early entrepreneur, which is the sort of buzz thing at the moment in terms of
before it had a word. Yep.
yeah. So he's got all of these types of businesses. So can I ask a question around one of the big things from a behavioural point of view is money controlling people versus you controlling money. It was certainly in my younger years, that was my biggest challenge, right? Where I just felt like I was a slave to money and I was always worrying about money. What was some of the sort of things that your dad did that taught you about how he worked out how to control money as opposed to how it was controlling most other households?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suppose without really knowing the full detail, because I was a kid.
Yeah.
Again, as I look back, that abundance sort of mindset, I guess the way I knew that he wasn't sort of scared of it or scared of it controlling him was because he used it, sort of thing.
Yep.
Like I said, we never sort of went without in terms of going on holidays and having nice dinners as a family and all those types of things. So I guess from my perspective, the fact that he used it in a fun way and we still had it and we never went without, was that sort of let me see that, it didn't really control him, especially in the early days. Yeah, like I said, I just think if you have the ability to use it, I don't think it necessarily can control you, sort of thing. Obviously, with respect to not spending all of it.
Yeah, well, that's probably the next question on the double click, right? Did he also plan for the future? Was there the appropriate amount of smelling the roses today for the reward for effort, in terms of obviously he was working hard, right? If he's always got fingers in pies, always making deals and so forth, how much was put away versus how much was, to provide for his young family at that time?
Yeah. So I won't get to the turning point in my life until the actual question comes up. But right now we are, house is paid off. Again, there's a circumstance as to why, but I'll get to that. House is paid off. We're all comfortable. I sort of live with my mum and my brother. My other brother lives next door. Not on the beaches anymore. We actually live out in the Hawkesbury now. So I suppose he has set us up to do the things that we can do now. And there's a lot of things that, I'm doing, my brothers are doing that sort of emulates sort of him as a person. But yeah, we'll get to the turning point when the next question comes up, but I suppose he has set us up. To put it shortly, he has, yeah.
All right, well, I'll let Bryce ask that question. My last question in this section then is, so tell us about setting up your first bank account and how you played with that, because we'll come into, the story that changed your focus. But in terms of just tell me about the routine of money. Did you get it pocket money? You said you never went out, which is great, but never went without, I should say. But in terms of, I want to know that story about how you learned how to manage your money from sort of day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis.
Yeah. So, the first sort of bank account that I used was probably one you guys know about, the old Dolomites.
Yep, the CBA Dolomite. Yep.
Yeah, the old Dolomites,
yep.
$2 a day, or whatever it was. So that was sort of my first experience of bank accounts per se. But again, it was more just a bit of a game at the time, I guess, as a kid. I suppose the first sort of instance in terms of what I understood as money was when I first started working at, the usual McDonald's job or as a paper boy. I had a few jobs as a kid. And just understanding that if you give time to something, you get paid for it. And that was sort of the first real instance in which I understood like money goes into an account and that, then you can use it and all those types of things. Like, because as a kid, we sort of just were lucky enough to, have it there sort of thing. They definitely, like, my parents definitely taught us the value of what money was, and like, this costs that, and you can't just willy-nilly buy things because it's not your money you're using, and sort of like you can't just spend stuff because that's not how it works in life. So yeah, I suppose.
Did you save up? Did you save up for?
There were some things I did. Yeah,
surfboards and skateboards and all of the above.
Skateboards, that type of stuff.
Yep.
As a kid, I played a lot of footy, so we would save up for like footballs and all those types of things.
Yep.
But yeah, it was probably very typical of a childhood. Like, you save up for something, you get excited about it. Your parents might put in, I'll match it. You save $100, I'll give you $100, and you can buy the thing for $200, sort of thing. Beautiful. It's very typical, probably very typical of a normal household, I guess.
Yep.
Jack, do you identify as a saver or a spender?
Definitely a saver. I actually think that for me personally, sometimes I'm too much of a saver.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I'm in a position for myself where I feel like I should spend a bit more money in terms of like enjoying myself. Sometimes I pull myself back because I'm like, oh, I should use this for something else, or I should invest it here, or I should do that, or I should do that. Yeah. So whenever I spend money, it's always analyzed from do I have enough to spend this money on fun if I've been able to invest something else beforehand, or that sort of thing. So I'm very hyper aware of what kind of money I spend on what.
Yeah, right.
So I don't really spend much on like clothes and all those types of things. Like, I'm not really big on spending money on things that won't benefit me in some way or another down the line.
Yeah. Well, you're 28, right? So where did the spark come for you to better understand money? And obviously it sounds like that you've had growing up to have exposure to business and hearing conversations that expose you and opening up your mind. Sounds like your beliefs around money were good, and they were built from an early age, and developing that abundance mindset is a good thing. So you've got this abundance mindset, but you're also a saver, and you're also thrifty, and you're also 28. So take us back to your early 20s or wherever the spark was. But what was the spark that wanted you to learn more about business investing and what you should do with your money?
So I suppose like I probably started gathering around the barbecue interest, as you guys put it, for property. Just probably like in my early 20s, that sort of, I understood like very vaguely, not as much as I do now, but like I understood that, if you buy a house, at some point it'll benefit you, whether or not it's something that you rent out or whether or not it's something that you own personally, like at some point a house will benefit you. And like I had a very cookie cutter understanding of what a rental property was and like how to invest and the money it took to invest. I thought $10,000 was enough to invest in a property, but that was naive now that I look back, but that's okay. I suppose the real turning point for me, which is an interesting one, is that like my dad actually passed away probably 4 years ago now. And it was interesting because for me, like I was really happy in the current position I was living at home. I was I'm a teacher. So I was teaching and I was happy in my career. I still am. But I was not really looking too forward in terms of like, okay, how do I step out and actually do my thing and make sure that I'm creating my own sort of identity and my own sort of personal independence, I guess. So sort of he passed away, and then sort of 6 months later, I sort of had this, and then I guess was sort of bubbling up over time that like I can't rely on just nothing sort of thing in terms of like I can't just do life with only sort of working. So I've always had this sort of small idea to do like run my own business, and it was all very theoretical. And then it was interesting because one night I just couldn't sleep, and because I'm a teacher, like my niche is sort of like obviously teaching. So I started a tutoring company about 3.5 years ago now. And that was sort of something that I wanted to do. And then now it's sort of, and I'm still running it now. So now it's sort of this thing that allows me to build up my sort of finances and help me invest in the things that I want to. And like the lessons that I learned, as a kid helped me sort of develop my own business into what it is today. I still work as a teacher full time as well, but the business is something completely different to work. Like it's very interesting in terms of like doing something for yourself is a lot different than doing something for somebody else. It can be stressful. It can be, anxiety inducing. It can be, what's this uncertainty? But at the end of the day, I love it. It's fun. I wouldn't stop doing it unless I absolutely had to. And the other thing that sort of led me to wanting to build something for myself, and I also have a partner, I should probably mention that, like for our life and having kids eventually and all that type of stuff, is I've had actually a bit of a medical history. I've had a couple of kidney transplants.
Oof.
So that's also, it's hard to explain what that does to your brain and your thinking, but it's always been the extra sort of, not step, but it's been the extra sort of motivation that I needed to keep up this investing and to build something solid now. So if ever the time came when I had to, stop working or whatever, I would be comfortable and confident in knowing that I've been able to build something before I've had to stop doing something, if that day ever came. So that's also another reason why I'm trying to build something for my life and my future life with my partner and kids and all that type of stuff.
It's unbelievable how something like that can give you the focus, because otherwise we just take for granted that the next day is coming and the next day is coming. With your health and the news you shared about your father, which of those two was first?
So the health is ongoing. So I had a kidney transplant in 2008.
Yep.
And that sort of didn't go to plan. So I ended up on dialysis for about 4 or 5 years. And then back in 2013, I had another transplant, thankfully. They get harder and harder to do as you do more.
Yeah.
So I'm more healthy now, which is great. So that one came first. But when Dad died, that really put things into perspective on sort of that the future is very important to plan for, because you just don't know what's going to happen. And the health part makes me just grateful for every day. Like the little things in life are super important, like just being here is good, sort of thing.
Well, that kind of gives us a little insight into your maturity at your age there, Jack. So that's a real credit to you.
Thank you.
In the lead up to this conversation, you said that the moment that your dad passed, it felt like a safety net had gone for you.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Because there's a bunch of people who would be listening to this who are in a position similar to you, where one or more parent is no longer with us. What does that mean, and how did you work through that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess you work through it, every day, and you just, it's just something you do. But in terms of like the safety net aspect, like, I was living at home and, you don't really take notice of the day-to-day stuff that, your parents pay for and what they do for you. And I guess I felt like afterwards that I couldn't put that pressure on my mum all the time. It wasn't really something that I wanted to do. I suppose it was for me, it was about creating my own safety net to know that you can do it and you can have something that you've created yourself, but it's just going to take time. And in terms of like figuring out how that sort of all happened, it's hard. It's kind of hard to explain because I don't really know exactly what sort of triggered that whole thing, but all I knew was that I had to build something for myself and sort of create something that was going to, let me sleep at night, sort of thing, if you put it in that sort of way, I guess.
Jack, do you mind if we, sort of go a little bit deeper in on the story of your father's passing? The reason why I asked that is because there is so much here that I want to unpack. But the first part about that is, did your dad look after the finances before he passed?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who then inside the family unit started to take care of the finances? And when did you start to realize, because obviously we've got a little bit of a clue that you're Northern Beaches and now you're out a little bit wider. Was that a result of that situation in terms of financially you needed to reset?
So, in terms of like the move, it was actually more of a sport move.
Okay.
So my brothers were doing a sport that was focused around the Hawkesbury, and it was just easier.
Yep.
Whereas I was still in the surfer sort of
Mindset.
surf in the morning, go to work, surf in the arvo, go to bed,
Yep.
go home, start again. But sorry, what was the second part of
Yeah,
that?
just about the finances. So
Oh, yeah.
did your dad have a defensive strategy in place? Was there enough money there to sort of set you guys up?
Yeah, so I mean, without getting into like the numbers and all that sort of stuff, he'd done everything right to make it all okay.
Beautiful.
So in terms of like struggling and things like that, we do all right, and we're comfortable in that sort of thing. My mum really stepped up and sort of just took hold of that sort of thing. But sort of, I guess it was sort of a team effort. Like my brothers were already involved in their own business. My dad was sort of working with them anyway, so they sort of handled that side of it, and their business is very good and successful. So they do their thing, and then I suppose for me it was like, okay, well, what am I going to do now? Like, what can I do now to make some sort of contribution, or to sort of not step up, but just, I don't know, have something as well as what everyone does, sort of thing.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
It's a really great story here, because that is, what your dad has been able to do in terms of organising his affairs and getting everything in order, and potentially having, the life policies and all of those other things that just provide for that future, just gives you enough breathing space to then do the necessary grieving. And, you've lost someone who's a mentor in your life and all of that type of thing. But to combine that also with effectively a serious health issue for yourself, on kidney dialysis for years during that time, when I was listening to that, my immediate thought was that you would be a spender, not a saver, right? Because ultimately you may, you're running the risk of a life being cut short. And here you're telling me I need to get serious about planning for a longer future. That is not normal. I'm letting you know, Jack, that most people, and my brother lost his fiance at 37 suddenly in a terrible accident on holiday, and I watched all the people around that circle of friends, and a lot of them changed their habits into the live now, because life can be taken from you in a split second, right? They didn't take that other mindset to sort of say, well, I need to plan to become what I plan to become. And so that's why it's quite I have to praise you in as much as I possibly can, because it's extraordinary that you're able to now think about, these life health issues, and you're still thinking medium to longer term. It is, for the community who are listening to this, this is a great life lesson that should never be lost on any of us. So can you just share with me a little bit more about how you came to that conclusion, like your behaviors and your actions behind the challenges that you faced?
Yeah. So thank you for all that. So I suppose for me, you're right. It could have gone the other way. But for me, really, my only goal now is to build something for my kids for the future, teach them, and hopefully I'll be able to get there. It's to build for the future, whether I'm there or not. It's just about trying to have something that they can enjoy, when they're 18, when they're 20, so they don't have to worry about, the everyday struggles that people go through in terms of money and stuff like that. So my goal is to just build for the future. Whoever's there, great. But as long as it's there, then I'm happy. Pretty much.
To replicate what your dad and mum gave to you.
Exactly right. Yep.
That lifestyle that you've painted, that picture, I want that lifestyle, right? And so being able to pay it forward to your family when your partner and you start that program, it is, it's just, it's the circle of life. It's being able to do all of that. So absolute credit to you, mate, in terms of being able to have that maturity that Bryce mentioned earlier. Now, I thought I said 29. Bryce is saying 28. So I hope I haven't put an extra year on your age, have I?
No, I'm 28 now, but by the time this comes out, I'll be 29.
All right, okay, fair enough.
I just read the notes, Ben. That's all I did. It's just where he said 28. That was all I was doing. So,
I'm looking at the notes here right now. It says 29.
anyway, so I guess it's very clear what the call is for you, Jack. So you got this call. You wanted to set yourself up. So what did that look like? Who was your mentors? What were you reading? What were you exposed to? And how did you lead to the most important part that everyone should listen? The first step that you took in action.
Yeah. Okay. So I suppose that was the first sort of thought process for property and property investment, but it was a very theoretical conversation for me because I had not a whole lot of understanding about it. But yeah, as you know,
so Dad wasn't a property investor, or wasn't?
No, he was. Well, technically, yes. He had some commercial things, and he bought the holiday house and stuff like that. Sure. So I suppose, yeah, he was even just looking back at it right now. Yeah, I guess he was. So yeah, and then I guess I started reading because I was curious myself, and I had a very learn-based approach in the beginning. So I read books. I did online seminars and things like that. There's a couple of people in my life that I see as mentors. One is a very, very successful person. He's got a lot of successful businesses and property investments himself. That's my brother's wife's father. He's a very, very handy person for me to know. I respect him immensely, and he's given me a lot of help. There was an old principal at my school who helped me understand what shares were. He still helps me now, and they were the other two who helped me understand that action is also needed. You can learn as much as you want, but at the end of the day, there's got to be some sort of action taken. So my first actual investment was shares, and that started as my initial sort of thought process was own around 25 stocks and you'll be fairly diversified. My investment strategy now for that has changed a little bit. If I can buy a certain amount of ETFs, then I can diversify the whole world. So that's sort of my share portfolio mindset. In terms of and that sort of just ticks along now. There's not a whole lot I think about with that. Don't check it. Definitely don't check it right now, especially. And then in terms of property, I guess, like I said, that mentor I had, or I still have, thankfully, he actually helped me with my first property purchase. It was something that helped me get a leg up pretty quickly. I got it just before COVID hit, I think. After the first end of 2020.
All those lockdowns just...
Yeah.
All those, they all just sort of end.
So it hits in February 2020, and so the market is moving,
it was before that. It was before that.
So 2019 then?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, right? Because then a pandemic hits.
Timing is important, yeah.
Yeah, no, the pandemic hits, right? And then it's for those first couple of months, everyone's thinking pandemonium, the world's going to collapse, and then obviously the government comes in with all of this stimulus and guarantees people's jobs. And the moment that happened, obviously the property market took off with record low interest rates. So, yes. But tell me about how you were feeling in those first couple of months of pandemic when effectively,
welcome to property ownership.
The Prime Minister's standing there going, we're just going to put Australia into a dormant state. We don't know for how long.
Yeah. So I guess, so it was the end of 2019. That was when I'm pretty sure economists had the property market tanking about 30%. I'm pretty sure it was around that sort of number.
How'd they go with that, you reckon?
Pretty bad. Because so that went well for me. That actually allowed me to leapfrog into the second one. There was some substantial equity from the first one after the once in a generation boom, as they call it. So that allowed me to actually pivot without too much complication into the next one using equity. And that one is up in Queensland, the whole interstate thing, as I got from you guys.
Borderless.
Borderless.
The first one was a house and land package. What was the second
It
one?
was, yeah. It was just a brick, your standard brick house in that southeast corridor.
Established, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So that one was an established one. The house and land one was actually helped by a family friend of ours. So that sort of made the process a lot smoother.
Were they in the game? Were they actually in the game and they helped you do it personally?
Yeah, so they actually, it was their company that they helped me with.
Sure.
And they were fantastic. I think it's a very after the second purchase, I would probably stay away from house and land. not because of like I personally think it was a good investment. It's worked well for me so far. Just if you're going to do it, get ready for heaps of paperwork. Like there is so much paperwork, especially at the start. Like once it starts building, it's super easy, but there is a lot of paperwork involved in that process between council and the builder and all that sort of stuff.
Well, there's a lot of trust because you're actually buying a future product that doesn't exist, right? So there's a lot of paperwork. You see a contract on an off the plan purchase is right up there with the thickness of the Bible versus a standard contract doesn't have that.
Yeah.
Jack, this is the bit that's really important, right? Because this is the bit that most people struggle with. And that's actually the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, right? It's that first step that people need to take. You had a mentor, you had someone helping you. Can you take us through the mindset that you were going through where you, at the point where you were a little uncertain, and then that tipping point threshold where you said, right, I am going to take action. What was going through your mind? What got you to take action? Because that's where I think the real juice is for everyone listening to this, because lots and lots of people listen to lots and lots of stuff and don't actually do anything, Jack. So that's where the real learning is.
So that house and land was actually originally for Oran Park, but the block that was chosen, it was pre-warned. It was a pre-warned power lines block, and it just didn't sit well. And I didn't think the decision could have been made. So we sort of scoured for just a rental return, a better rental return sort of block, which was up the coast, up the New South Wales coast, sort of Lake Macquarie area. And I suppose there were two things that sort of helped me step there. And that was, I made a lot of phone calls and things like that to real estate agents in the area, just about what was happening, what they thought was a fair price for a property at the time, what sort of realistic yields they were getting in the area in terms of what I was sort of going to pay for mine, and sort of the numbers stacked up. And the other component that helped was that, so that my mentor that I was talking about, unofficial mentor, I suppose, he was sort of he never pushed me to do anything. But once I made the call, he said, absolutely fantastic decision. I couldn't have told you to do it. It had to be your choice, but I think you've done the right one. And that sort of, I suppose, like helped me to understand, or helped me to feel better that the choice I made was, a good one. Fast forward to now, it was definitely a good one. So I was pretty happy with the way it went the first time. So my first step was basically a mix of, again, a little bit of research, a little bit of help from a mentor, and just that little bit of action from myself, I guess.
But any reservations on taking the action? Were there some demons running around in your head going, oh, I'm not so sure? And if so, how did you overcome those? Honestly,
it was, if I don't do it now, I probably will never do it, pretty much. If I don't take some sort of action now when I've got the best position to, then I won't ever do it. So I did it.
So fortune favours the brave is the way the statement goes. And look, a little luck came your way in the sense that you bought in a regional area when a pandemic hits and everyone wants to get out of the city locations. What other considerations did you make around, supply of land in the area? Because yes, fortunately the demand did come, and that's what pushed the prices high with the low interest rates. But is there any consideration that you had around oversupply risk in sort of building a new estate area?
Yeah. So in terms of like the scarcity factor. I mean, I understand that in those types of areas, there will always be some sort of land, at least for the next 10 to 15 years.
Release.
You're releasing. Yep, that's right. So what I looked for was sort of, I suppose it's the old, like, best house in the best street or whatever. So I looked for if I couldn't find scarcity from a actual land component point of view, I'd find scarcity from the actual placement of the block itself.
Yep.
Like the block that I purchased has a view that will never be moved based on council sort of regulations. So I guess that was sort of the difference, and there was only about 10 or so in the area, and that sort of there'll only be about 10 in the area, and it actually did have a slight premium on it when I did buy it. But looking now, like, the blocks that are for sale that don't have that are worth a lot more anyway. So I suppose what I thought was that, the land will be still selling, and that's fine. But at least I picked something that the numbers sort of added up, and it was a block that wasn't sort of, you couldn't just pick it and
not
like,
run
you
of the
probably
mill.
won't be able to pick it again.
So it had a uniqueness to it, and obviously that means that the value is baked in, right? So effectively that premium should, as you say, if it can't be built out and it's got views or whatever it is, you would assume that will be baked in going forward because of that scarcity element to it. Now, the other thing, and this is probably important for also our community to think about, with Jack being 28, coming up to 29, the considerations that Jack needs to make compared to say a family who are in their 30s, late 30s, mid to late 30s, who have equity in a home in a city location, they've got the luxury of potentially chasing a more higher value type asset in the city locations. The trade-off for you was you're only bringing a certain amount of deposit to the table, and cash flow was going to be important. So whilst Bryce and I do say, in a perfect world, we want you to buy in large centres because of the trade and exchange of, sort of activity that's going on in those areas. That's the economic activity that's going on in the flywheel. What's important here is to also understand that doesn't mean that you should not look at other alternatives, right? And the other pathways in terms of getting into the market. So for the younger population, this is a pathway. This is a way in which you can look at it and say, all right, well, I've got to make a decision, and it's still got to be an informed, calculated based on supply demand in the short term, but also looking for the longer term economic activity that's going to happen in that region. And you're going to get some growth, right? You're going to get system growth, or maybe a little bit better, but also that yield in the early stages is critical for you to get that foot in the door. And is that part of the decisioning process that happened for you as well, Jack?
Yeah, it was. So even like the rental possibilities when I first started were good, and then 12 or 18 months later, whenever it was, that I actually eventually rented it out, it was a lot better.
Yep.
So that's why it allowed me to go again, because I had sort of the yield appropriate to sort of use the equity to go again.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like, I could have spent another 5 or 10 years trying to save up, like you said, for a sort of inner city sort of property, but I may never have got there. So
Yeah.
you just don't know. And I suppose, and again, like you mentioned, like, my risk tolerance is a lot higher because I don't have a lot of dependence in terms of, like, I don't have kids, and I don't have a home loan, and that sort of stuff. So
you got the time on your side there, but the time horizon looks wonderful for you as well, given the fact that you've started so long. We talk about the game being at least 3 decades. When you add 3 decades to your age, there's an incredible amount of wealth that awaits you if you stay on the path. And my question to you is, what is the goal? Like, sure, you've broken into the market, you've taken the action, you've used some of the beliefs that were instilled in you as a youngster through your parents and what you saw. So you've got these tracks that you're running on, but where's the destination? What are you aiming for? Have you had an opportunity to think about how do I turn this asset success into the designed lifestyle that I want it to be? And if so, what sort of conversations and thinking have you had around that?
Yeah, so the future occupies my mind a fair bit. It's very hard to not think about it. That's just how I'm wired. But for me, and sort of for my partner, short term, I want to buy at least one more investment property, and I think that'll be within the next sort of 6 to 12 months. I've already, started looking about and seeing what my options are. The 5-year goal is to have a house of our own, hopefully, with a kid in there somewhere, fingers crossed again. And then sort of the long-term goal is I love doing this. I love my business. I love thinking about property. I love all the investment stuff. It's just part of my life now, and I wouldn't, trade it for anything. So the long-term goal is to continue to learn, to continue to, if I'm in a position to continue to keep going and purchase property and do it the right way and all that type of stuff, I will. My goal is to continue running my business, hopefully with me less hours. We'll see how we go. Can't seem to drag myself away. But my overall goal is by 50, I want to be able to choose what I want to do. I've got a bit of time, but it's also something that, I want to, it's hard because I want to have a successful business, but I also want to be the best teacher I can be, which I haven't really spoken about all that much, but I have goals to be a leader in that field as well. So I want to try to sort of figure out a way to be able to do it all. We'll see how we go. I'm not too sure, but eventually I want to, have dabbled in the principal sort of realm. If I manage to get there whilst running a business and having a family and all that type of stuff. So the goal, I suppose the long-term goal is to live off what I've created in the next sort of 5 years, I suppose. Work as hard as I possibly can now so I can enjoy it later on.
Jack, I would summarize you as basically the perfect type of member of our community, a young, aspiring Australian whose glass is more than half full. It is basically someone who believes in abundance, and is ready to take on the challenges that come with that, because there's great reward in taking action. And here I can see, 3 pillars of your life. You've got your effectively side hustle that's going on, which is helping you. Let's obviously know that that's helping you in terms of accelerating your course, but you're also a teacher. Talk about impactful and meaningful work that you're doing. Doesn't get any better than teaching, right? That Bryce and I love what we do here because in a sense, we're quasi teachers, right? We're guides in terms of trying. So it's a very rewarding to do that. And I understand how that must be amazing. And we all know our teachers don't get paid enough. So to complement that, you've also said, well, if it is to be, it's up to me, and I'm going to go off and invest. And so I'm going to put my money to work. So even though, and then I want to become a principal. My God, mate, this is awesome. What a great story for from where I sit. It's just like, how can we help? How can we be a part of that in terms of, because the risks are, like you said before, just trying to make more right decisions than wrong decisions, right? And ultimately that is life. It's about, in terms of the trade-offs, and then obviously ultimately trying to make more judgment calls in the right direction as opposed in the wrong direction. And if you're disciplined about that and you perform that over a longer period of time, mate, it's almost guaranteed. It's very hard not for it to work. And we've got proof of that with the thousands of clients that we're working with to sort of tell you that if you maintain the discipline, if you have the pathway forward, it's just about then continuing on that journey, right? And there will be bumps in the road. There will be challenges. There will be incorrect decisions as well, which leads to probably my last question, because I could talk to you all day and get right into the weeds with you. Interest rate changes. How has that impacted you in terms of managing cash flow?
Yeah, it has a little bit. So when I bought, but having both before all the interest rate changes, I suppose they probably were positive, which is a good thing, I guess. which I was probably lucky to have at the time. The rate changes have impacted obviously the repayments and things like that.
Yeah.
But just because of the way I sort of live and spend, it hasn't really impacted all that much, to be quite honest. It just means there's a little bit extra coming out every fortnight and every month. So I guess like it's impacted in terms of I can see that there's a little bit less in the bank account, but in terms of like the way I live my life, it hasn't really at all, just because I sort of wanted to make sure that when they did come, and they'll keep coming probably, that it isn't going to really have too much of an effect. And I suppose that's the next sort of, decision that I'll have to make, whether or not I do go again in the midst of, all this interest rate rise and, whatever is going to happen over the next few months, or do I wait to see if there might be a flat line or even a decline in the rates? But I do believe that if I was to go again, that I'll be able to control it and sort of make it work anyway. But that's just me. Can
I give you a little guidance in that conversation?
Absolutely.
Right?
Sure.
Like ultimately, we believe that you should always act when your situation allows you to act. So if you're confident in, obviously, your teaching, that seems like it's a tick. You've got a solid, secure job there. If the tutoring also seems to be in pretty good shape, then the question is going to be, and I suspect from a confidence point of view in the property market, the moment that we see interest rates pause, there's a lot of people like you who may be sitting on the sidelines, right? So the challenge here, and it's always a calculated risk, reward, return here, that the ones who wait, and then, there is going to be a bit of pent up demand for when interest rates pause, because as much as a lot of people are doing it tough and, respectful of those people during the Christmas, New Year period, that it is a tough time right through that. But there are a lot of people who are in a fortunate position like yourself who can take advantage of these situations. And I'm sort of saying that, so just play your routine, play your discipline, and then get your numbers in order. And then you can always be searching and researching as part of that, because you'll know basically when the time's right. Because remember, your horizon is, as Bryce mentioned earlier, it's 30 years. Now you're talking about obviously at the age of 50, but at the age of 50, you're going to be about future choices, but your wealth doesn't stop. Your wealth keeps growing. The power of compound keeps ripping on. So I think, if that's a little takeaway for you in terms of stay the course, execute, and always, it's one of those sort of sayings they talk about in investment. They talk about a conviction strongly held until new information is arriving, right?
100%.
So you should always have a conviction strongly held until new information can potentially change that position. So
transcend and include, Ben. You include everything you had in the past, but there's an opportunity to transcend what you've done. You just transcend and include. So yeah, well said. Hey, Jack, my last question I'll put to you shortly, but my summary of what Ben just said, and as I'm thinking about your scenario, is if you stay the path, because you've got mindset, right? Money's simple, behavior is hard. So you've got that sort of, from a very early age, you had good money beliefs, which is great. If you stay the path of what you're doing, and it seems very apparent that you will, optimizing sequencing is really the only thing left for you, right? Because some of the decisions that you're making along the way, with a bit of certainty, will actually give you an opportunity to make good decisions at the right time, fully informed around having a little look around the corner. That's what I see, because by the time you're 50, you'll be investing for 26, 27. Were you 24 on the first one? 24, 25?
Yeah, 24, 25, something like that.
25, right? So you'll, by the time you get to 50, you'll have equally been investing as much as you hadn't been investing, right? So there is a long pathway for you. So just that opportunity to optimize that sequencing along the way is really where I see the main opportunity for you, is because you take action, you're doing it, you're prioritizing it, you're a saver, you're thinking about the future, you've got a very mature outlook at your age. I think it's for all the things that we've just talked about previously about, that's a real credit to you. I think you should double down on that. My final question for you is this. I put the call out usually at the beginning of the year, where I say, set yourself a target, implement some of these ideas, take action, and then come on to our summer series and tell others about it. So Not everyone puts their hand up and comes on. So why did you respond? What would you love for the takeaway message to be to people who are listening, who are in your age bracket, but people who are older than you? What would you want the takeaway message to be from having this conversation today?
I guess one of the first things that like sort of piqued my interest was the ability to actually have a conversation with you guys, because I spent a lot of time, reading your books and listening to your podcast, and just sort of a lot of it resonated with the way I sort of do things and the way I think. And to be honest, I never actually thought I'd get on here. I thought there'd be heaps and heaps of people sort of applying for it. So yeah, being able to talk to you guys was probably the biggest actual push for me. I love learning, so I always want to be learning off people who have been there and done it, and people that will be able to help me in my journey, and to just be able to have a couple more people in my life that are able to give advice and who are able to talk about the things that I'm trying to do that you guys have already done, that type of stuff. And I guess honestly that's pretty much the biggest reason. So I was a little bit selfish in that respect. Like I said, I'm not a huge person about sharing sort of my financial sort of life. I like to just try and, if people come and ask me for advice, then I'm more than willing to share it. And if people want to talk about it, then I love talking about it. But I won't be one to sort of go out of my way to talk about it. Just because, if you want to learn, you'll ask. If you don't, then you won't hear it anyway. So I guess the other reason was that just an opportunity to talk about something that's so interesting and something that's such a passion of mine with like-minded people is just, an added bonus, I suppose. Yeah.
Thanks for coming on. I feel like we're obligated now to say, is there a question?
That's what I was about to say. The mic is yours. The mic is, talk to our community, Jack. What would, obviously you've now got a voice to the community. What advice would you give to the community in terms of, the message that's working for you and how you'd help motivate and give confidence for others? Okay,
so the main things or takeaways, I suppose, for everyone listening, make sure you educate yourself. Like, make sure you know what you're doing in terms of what you're about to do, because whilst action is a good thing, you need to know what the action is you're going to be taking. So make sure you know what's going on. Lean on people that have done it. That will be your best points of call. You can educate yourself all you want with self sort of education, but the best way to learn is through experience. And if you don't want to make a mistake yourself, at least ask the people who've already made the mistakes. So hopefully you can learn a lesson from them. Work hard. There's a lot you can achieve in a small amount of time if you actually put yourself in a position to be able to create something. It's definitely not easy, and it doesn't seem possible. I definitely wouldn't have thought all of this was possible 3 or 4 years ago. But if you do really have a focus, make sure you laser in on it and don't stop until you think it's done.
Beautiful. Now, I did interrupt Bryce's other question, which was, if you did have a question for us, I think was where you were going, Bryce. So
my Jack,
apologies for that.
You've got the Property Investment Advisor of the Year there. What question would you ask him about your portfolio?
Oh, what's the next one? What do I do with the next one? How can you help me with the next one?
Crystal ball.
Yeah, the crystal ball. No, it's a good. I suppose, like, what's one thing that someone in my position can best, would do well with knowing, like. That doesn't really make sense, but
no, I understand where you're going with it, and I'll come back to what Bryce said before. So if you're asking me what the sequencing bit's really important, right? Because here's the challenge that you're going to face from a cash flow point of view, is the combination of the principal place of residence and also having the child. That is going to potentially put pressure on the number 3, in terms of property number 3. So it's about putting that order in place, because if that principal place of residence is the dream home, then you may actually want to reconsider property investment number 3 and just be a little bit more patient in terms of moving to number 3. We can always get number 3 after we get the big rock in the jar, but come back to that big rock in the jar story. So if I was sitting down and we were doing a consult right now, I'm running 2 scenarios for you, 2 models, and I'm showing you both of those models in terms of when we're going to have the children, how is all that going to look, and how does that smash cash flow? And then the other one in terms of, okay, what does it look like if we go for the dream home firstly, as opposed to a step in, you know, on the property ladder for our dream home. So, and, you know, some of the things could also be considered is we'll buy a good home with good bones, but when we can then future renovate it, all of that type of stuff would be part of a proper conversation if we were sitting down in a professional sense. And then, as you know, what happens there is it makes the invisible visible, and then we make an informed decision. So as I said to you before, it's about discipline, but it's also about making the right judgment calls. And there are going to be some trade-offs. So getting that sequencing right, which means about getting the judgment calls right, is really the problem that we would try and solve for to again, increase your probability of hitting your target at 50, which is, you know, so we've got line of sight on the goal. It's basically the pathway in which how we get there.
I actually do have one question now that this is probably one that many people might relate to actually.
Sure.
What if you don't have any idea where you want to live?
Ooh.
Okay, so
our plan, so like in theory, our plan would be buy something in around 5 years' time, but we have no idea where we want to live.
Okay, so there's a brilliant and exciting exercise in which you are going to go on that journey, right? And how you make that decision is based on the weighted importance you put on certain things in your life. So if you put a high weight of importance to ocean, because ocean makes you have that relaxation time, that clear thinking time, or again, that surfing time, which makes you feel alive, then you need to weight that really highly. And then you work through it. Is education going to be important for your children? Well, no, you're a teacher. So maybe, you know, you can compromise on education in terms of that. Then you start to think about lifestyle and amenity. You know, like obviously, you know, plus your career, you've also got to be thinking about if you're going after, you know, that principal, you know, sort of aspiration of becoming a principal in a school system, then those are the types of things. And then you just basically try and put a weighted matrix together. And then when you're getting that connection together with your partner, then ultimately the road will become clearer. The pathway will become clearer. And then once you see the must-haves versus the nice-to-haves, you know, the critical importance and the nice-tos, then that answer will actually show itself to you over time.
What a great question, Jack. What a great framework for people to, if they're feeling the same way, because who knows what you want in 5 years, Jack, but there are some clues. Mate, it's been a privilege for us to, you mentioned that you don't like talking about your personal circumstances. You've done pretty well doing that just quietly. So, and we've uncovered some gold there where you've just hit Ben with some great questions towards the end there. So I think there's a bit in it for everyone, irrespective of their age. But mate, the summer series is all about people sitting over their vacation time, their holiday time, just listening to other people's stories, let that percolate in so that they can actually set an intention for the year ahead to do better, to create a lifestyle that they want, and they can see what you're doing. So thank you for coming on. And we know that you were nervous at the beginning and you did incredibly well. And on behalf of everyone on the podcast, mate, keep doing what you're doing. Optimize that sequencing, and mate, we will see you well and truly with a lifestyle by design by the time you're 50.
Thank you very much for having me. Absolute pleasure.
Likewise, pleasure.
Awesome,
for us, mate.
Wonderful story,
mate. Wasn't that a great story? I loved that he still had this incredible focus on the future, Ben, despite the personal circumstances around the transplant that we often see, and you made point of it in the interview, that a lot of people would pivot from long-term focus to short-term focus in those circumstances, but not Jack. He is well and truly got his ducks lined up in a row and an eye on the prize, which is the long-term view, which is just an unbelievable credit to him.
Yeah, it's a good story, right, Bryce? Because another, 2 teachers in a row. This is what I like about the story. So Jack grows up, good money foundations. So actually sounded like a great lifestyle that he had. His dad worked hard for himself. Obviously there was, again, that bump in the road, that sad loss of his father, then his own medical challenges, but defense was in play. So his lifestyle had been built on good foundations. Now he wanted to then build on those foundations. So he wasn't going to be lazy. He wasn't going to take advantage of, any entitlement that he was getting. He was going to build from that. So that's what I love about this particular story, because it does show how is he going to do it. Once he worked out that there was an interest, he had a good mentor that he was able to also talk to. Then he developed his side hustle that allowed for the money to start coming in. So all of this individually, remember, this is before he partnered up and doing all of the stuff and just got on with the job. And so that for me is a story about not leaving anything to chance, being organized, being diligent in that particular process. And now he finds himself with, some future story around, what he's going to do next in terms of planning.
Love it. And so really the next step is just to really lean in on the optimizing of that sequencing. I think that's really important. And I guess that's the message we say to our broader community. It's great to take action. It's great to have some great results, but you get to amplify your results when you get to have a real good look at, okay, what is the North Star? How do I get the sequencing right? And how do I optimize the choices that I make from here? Because clearly Jack is an action taker. Action takers are usually the ones that do all the success, Ben, with very few exceptions. And so therefore, I think if he could lean into that sequencing and our listeners could lean into that sequencing, I think there's a real optimizing approach that can be done to this portfolio.
Yeah, again, it's a classic case of now, by doing that planning work from this point forward, you're going to minimize your risk of a mistake. So he's got a couple of options. He's got PPOR, big rock in the jar, and then obviously the children, how that's coming along. And then potentially, as he said, he's got the option now to go with that next property in the next 6 months, probably number 3. But that's about sort of organizing those thoughts and trying to optimize for that point. But there is a theme that's developing here, Bryce, from our summer series. And that is that, again, no matter what's put in front of our champion summer series guests, they remain positive. No is not an answer. They are continuing to take action. They have this move forward mindset in terms of what it looks like. And they get that feeling of being back in control. So yes, like any of us, we can have these moments of, ooh, I didn't expect that. Oh, that's going to be interesting. But once you've got your money organized and everything in, you don't have to worry about the finances. In Jack's case, he just has to worry about getting well, and that's what he's able to do because he had organized himself in a really, really nice way. And if we go back to Jessica, from last week, it was the same sort of thing. I always want to look at what's the worst case scenario, looking at worst case scenario and then sort of saying, okay, I can live with that. And Mandy also talked about that. No wasn't an option. I can live with that, in terms of worst case scenario. So, they've all battled through. That hasn't necessarily come easy, but that's also inspiring. So for the rest of us who have maybe been even more fortunate without having any health issues, without being in any situation where we've got the financials in front of us, that's lazy money. You need to put it to work. And planning is the best way to do that, to minimize the mistakes. So that's why you'll always hear us in terms of talking about getting organized and start to think about your future pacing in terms of what you want to do with your money and how you can make it work for you.
Well done, Jack. Great story, great resilience, incredible authenticity and transparency that I think will be our communities will be the beneficiary of that. And so thank you for coming on, Jack. We appreciate it. Now, Ben, just want to shout out to you and to all of our community. I hope everyone has a Merry Christmas. We will be back next week, but clearly it's a wonderful time of the year for spending time with your family, whether you celebrate Christmas or not. It's just a joyous part of the year in the Southern Hemisphere where hopefully the sun is out where you are currently listening to this podcast, mate. But until next week.
Well, I've got to return the serve, Bryce, firstly by saying Merry Christmas to you and Andrew and to also Samuel and Jack. Hope you have a great Christmas break. And we'll see you in the new year. And to the rest of our community, the same thing applies. For some people, it is a difficult time, but hopefully for the majority of our people, this is a time to spend with family and appreciate the things that we do have in this great country. So I'm wishing you all a very Merry Christmas, and we'll be talking to you in the new year. And my final sign off, as always, Bryce, was always in the summer series, not as always, but in this summer series, is take action, because your future self will thank you for it.
I like it, Ben, but mate, I'm not going to see you in the new year. I'm going to see you next week. So you're not taking off too early, but return serve to you and your family as well. There you go, folks. Enjoy. We'll see you next week.
Hey guys, Bryce here again. Just want to catch you before you go and let you know, if you're new to our community, there are a lot of episodes to catch up on, but it's really important that you start from the very beginning at episode number 1. Because episode 1 through to 20 share all of the foundational pillars and frameworks that you need to know to get the best out of listening to this podcast. So I'd recommend that you start there, and the little tip is to maybe start on 1.5 speed. Now, for those of you that are time poor and don't have time to go back from the beginning, don't worry, we've got you covered as well, because we've created a binge guide that goes through all of the details and makes it easy for you to read and get up to speed very, very quickly. So if you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, you will be able to download that binge guide and you will be up to speed in no time. And whilst you're there, I've got a few extra goodies for you, because we have our top 5 frameworks that you'll learn on this podcast, as well as the Make Money Simple Again ebook, which will help you with the foundations of basic money management, so you'll have everything you need to succeed in building your own lifestyle design and getting the best out of this podcast. Now, just a reminder that anything that we cover on this podcast is not considered financial advice. We certainly recommend that you get your unique circumstances looked at by your individual advisor, and everything we talk about is just general in nature. But folks, I want to encourage you again to go to thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, and you can go and get all those goodies and catch up right away.